You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Thomas Hildebrandt, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi Thomas, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm really happy to have you on the show today, and it's awesome that you're here with me physically today, also in Copenhagen, as you are a professor at the University of Copenhagen. So, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, as I just said, you are a full professor of computer science at the University of Copenhagen. Assuming everyone was caught surprised in some way by the emergence of ChatGPT in November 22, I'm curious to hear what caught someone like you by surprise.
I was surprised by, both the capability of this new technology. We have had chatbots for many years, but now there was something different, right? You could speak to it in a natural language, and it could kind of deceive everyone. So they thought that there was some kind of understanding behind this technology. And then I must admit, I have also been very much surprised by how long this hype has been going, and how much people want to think that this can solve all our problems.
That's twofold, isn't it? There's also a lot of people saying that this can only lead to more problems, right?
Yeah, that's true. But there are of course many camps. But if you look at the media and the industry and the governmental institutions, they are still very much eager to exploit this potential that many consultancy companies are kind of reporting about.
Yeah, I'm guilty as charged, but but I think also we try to also bring, of course, a more moderate approach to this. I try to say, these two extremes. This is something that will change and fix the whole world, and the other one saying this will only lead to all the problems in the world.
Yeah.
So seeing how can we find something in the middle, and I'm curious to ask you about that as well, also later in this episode. But what about the technology here? It surprised you. You must have seen something like this emerging. You must have followed it as it developed.
Yeah, you have followed it. You have seen how good neural networks and similar technology could generate material, but it always had this kind of easy to tell fake thing about it. And of course now we can also spot when ChatGPT has been playing, but it's very convincing, right? So I must admit I was also surprised, but also about the speed of uptake, how quickly it was. So that's the big thing here, right? Is that it's so easily available. It appeared in my daughter's Snapchat without me knowing, right? So that was really surprising.
Yeah, and that's also part of the public response that you are also addressing in your work, isn't it? How we can sort of maybe avoid some of those more unsafe uses of the technology, isn't it?
Yes. So a lot of my research has been about how can we use AI in a responsible way? That's also why I joined the Danish Standards group on AI, so we can contribute to the ISO standards and European standards on AI. But and I have been collaborating with private and public companies. But until now, for the last 10 years, people have been trying to predict the future and predict customer behavior or citizens in the society, and that has a lot of downsides and problems as well. But now we were almost reaching a period where people say, okay, this is probably not the most valuable or ethical correct use of AI, and then we had the new hype, right? So now everyone wants to just speak with the computer, and they want to believe that the answer is correct.
Yeah, but I've been also, that what you're saying is everyone's trying to sort of contain it a little bit before and maybe saying we shouldn't do this and that.
Yeah.
But there's also, I just thought of this the other day while doing a presentation, I think last Wednesday, where I said maybe, you know, the things that we don't like about social media and the algorithm sort of controls how we think and what we feel about the world to some extent when we just, you know, doom scroll. Maybe generative AI will actually make us go a little bit away from that, because we will know that everything is fake or potentially fake. The potential for fake content is much greater now.
It is, but it's also a bit terrifying, right? Because we had the internet that gave us access to a lot of information and people around the world, and that happened when I started computer science in 91, many years ago in Aarhus. And that was amazing. I mean, of course we had internet before, but now it became this public thing that everyone had. So in the early 90s, and then we had to learn what to trust and what not to trust, and we had to learn that we could look up dodgy websites that we shouldn't believe, and now we have this new technology that can produce content in an automated way, and it's not to be trusted really, but it's so easy to set up an agent that can make a news media producing 100 articles every week, right, or every day. So now we just have to consider how can we navigate in a world where maybe the majority of the information out there is not trustworthy. So what are the mechanisms we have to introduce to gain back control of information?
We already have that. I think that was one of my conclusions when I said that the other day. I said that, you know, that's why I said maybe away from social media, the algorithm controlled, you know, proliferation of content into something that's mediated. Actually, social media is not really a media. It's not really mediated into, you know, the old newspapers, the old, you know, journalists that actually mediate something, have a message, have a profile.
Yeah,
I'm just saying there could be a backlash here, right? We've been social media is good because we believe there is someone behind every message we see. We believe there's a person behind it.
Yeah.
If we start in 5 years to say, or maybe just a couple of years to say, there's not necessarily a person behind the message, maybe humans will say, we don't want this. The resilience in humans and the human mind, and no one likes AI-generated content, right?
Well, no, but people are under pressure, and we also see it in the journalist occupation that they're beginning to use it, and they don't have the required time to actually question the sources. So we actually see that now human generates nonsense because they get secondhand information from either a chatbot or something from the online media that they tend to believe and not question enough. So I think the problem is deeper than just going back to newspapers, because we also risk losing the trustworthiness of our media, more classical media.
Because we used to sort of trust systems to some extent. They've been structured and they've been, you know, focused on answers that are correct. So we want to trust them.
Yep.
And generally, I say people want to trust their environments. They want to trust other people. They want to trust what's presented.
Yep.
We don't go around all the time rediscovering the world, right?
Yep.
But in this case, we have to be constantly aware that some things might be fake or wrong, and we don't do that. Automation bias is by far the biggest threat, exactly. I think, in this.
Yeah, exactly. And the point is that the organizations and we as citizens are so much under pressure for using this technology. I mean, we have newspapers every week saying, here's a new report telling about the technological potential of this technology, and the politicians think, they are mandating the public employees to take courses in learning how to do this. So they really want to believe that this is a big hammer that can solve everything, and it's I mean, it's deceiving. You don't know when it makes the mistake, right? The first 10 answers might be right, and then number 11 is wrong, and that's what occupies me a lot these days. How can we get back on some responsible track?
But that's also where I try to say, when I do my presentations, I always mention these faults, or what you call pitfalls they have, the context unawareness, the jailbreak issues, the hallucinations nonetheless, right? The most important of all, the hallucinations. And people like, they don't hear that.
Nope.
They don't hear that in the market, that they have these issues. But I always mention it to say, okay, we need to find the cases where it makes sense to use a lying machine or an unreliable machine,
yep.
right? Because it can do some things in areas where we don't do things today. You can actually make it can give you some light in dark rooms, I usually say.
Yep.
But if you add it to something that you already like Andreas Welz from SAP said in the podcast in episode 6, that we can't just put it in our business critical SAP finance processes because we can't have hallucination on a decimal in the general ledger. It doesn't work that way. We can't work with that. So some things we just can't do it in, but other places it makes a lot of sense to do it. But you have to know the exceptions to the rule, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and you have to know that. I mean, basically, my general advice for AI is that it's a technology that allows you to solve problems where you don't have the recipe, where you don't know how to set up the rules. So it gives you another way of coming up with solutions. What you pay for that is that it may fail. So you have to be aware that either it's okay to fail. I mean, maybe this is a song or a headline for your new article, and I mean, there's no correct answer, and you can easily spot if it's odd. Or you have other tools, verification tools. I mean, if you generate some computer code, you can test the code, and then you can care less about how you came up with the code if you can test it. But of course, you have to know then basic computer principles that, I mean, tests are never complete.
No, Jari Vadan said evals are some of the most difficult things to do with these technologies today. You can't really do. You don't know if you're going to get something better or worse. It's really difficult, he said.
And actually now we see in the students at the university are kind of postponing the learning until the exam. And then they actually perform less good because they use this technology to come over the hand-ins, the mandatory hand-ins, and then of course not all students, right? But some students have this problem. So they have to learn that, okay, we don't ask you to do mandatory assignments just to keep you occupied. It's actually, there's a learning principle behind that, and that's the important part, right? And of course, we also have to look at how much time pressure we put our students in. But yeah, so the basic thing is that usually AI, if you can either afford to fail or you can validate the result in another way. And the problem here is that people tend to forget the last part, that you need this validation, the human in the loop for validation. So if you ask ChatGPT or similar technology to summarize 100 pages, you don't go and read all the 100 pages afterwards, right? Because then you have not won anything. But the problem is, it may make mistakes, right?
Yeah, and you might be automation biased to say, okay, these were the 5 important things, but maybe there were 6 things, and maybe you missed if it's a contract, maybe you missed a $100 million liability, right?
And I hear now in the public sector, sorry, also in the private, that they believe you can ask these language models factual questions and also questions about the law. And of course, sorry, questions with the law is also a gray zone, because some answers are more discussion answers, but other answers must be very precise, and it may even be illegal to make a software system that gives you wrong automated legal advice, right?
Yeah.
So, and people are not aware of that. They think this is a.
That's because they want to go to autonomous. I just think that people want so desperately to go to autonomous, but in Danish we say crawl, walk, run, right?
Yeah.
Kravle, gå, løbe.
Yeah.
you need to start to crawl first. And I think one of the things that we're talking to a lot of companies about right now is, just figuring out how we can maybe get some insights about what's in the contracts by making some very precise RAG models, maybe only with some limited amounts of text from the contracts.
Yeah.
So they get a better way to operationalize contracts they are really bad at operationalizing today.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the first step. Let's see if we can fix that.
Yeah.
And when we have that fixed, maybe we can then start to do more legal stuff. But I constantly hear this, legal professionals are going to be replaced or, with Gen AI, but I haven't seen it yet.
No.
Because I've only seen it do like 20 to 80% or something, but never a full job done, and always something crappy done.
Yeah.
It never gets a full job done, and you never get this 100% accuracy. And if there's one thing a lawyer can't live with, it is not knowing if there is a liability he's signing in a document.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what's coming out now. I just read the other day that in the US, during the last year, we had $700 million venture funding of startups, of AI-based legal tech startups. So there's a
very big push,
very big push for using this technology, and so far, it has mostly been used for legal search and maybe drafting.
Yeah.
And of course, it's good at drafting, right? It's a language model. And legal search can work if you do, as you say, combine it with some more classical indexed RAG.
Exactly.
Where you retrieve some data, right? You just have to know that requires work because you need to chop up your information in nice pieces, right?
Yeah, I think also the auto indexes like AI search from Microsoft is getting better and better all the time. They're investing heavily in that, I know. So that's why we were working with these pre-defined models a lot in Azure, because that's the easy way to say, let's get something done without overspending to see if it works, right?
So people have to understand there's no free lunch here. You have to do some work. You cannot just throw.
At least you have to understand what are your problems before you can fix them, I always say as well, right?
Yeah, also that.
But I just thought of one thing, right? Because you said you have to have rules, right? And you have to understand what you're doing. And I always thought that data-driven means this also rule-based, right? But people are telling you have to be data-driven and use AI. That's rule-based. But the new AI we want to build is chaotic. It's stochastic, right?
Yeah.
So not rule-based. So how do we combine these two things? That's a difficult question, I know.
Yeah, but that is what I'm very much engaged in right now, right? So we have built up this rule-based system during the last 15 years for capturing temporal rules, also making tools that allow lawyers and non-programmers to mark up rules in text and then represent it as this knowledge graph called a DCR graph. And the thing is that this gives you a very precise map of the rules, what must be done before something else. But it's very cumbersome to do this markup manual. And this is where the text processing can be exploited because you can use the language model's understanding to identify, okay, what are the actions, what are the roles, what are the temporal connections. So we made actually...
So you built the rules with the language models,
exactly.
Basically.
And
nice.
we have made the first small interface that can be tested online, where you can type in some text and then it identifies rules. But it sometimes makes errors, of course, right? So you have to have the human in the loop. So it asks you, say, okay, is this what you meant? And then you need to know the rule graph notation to say, okay, no, that's actually the complete opposite.
Yeah. Then you go RLHF on it, almost, right? Yeah. But I also thought of one thing today when I came into work and I knew we were going to have this chat today. I thought. Because I remember when we met a couple of months ago for a cup of coffee, you just had a chat with another professor. I don't know where he was from, can't remember. And he said to you said something, and then he said, "What are your sources?" He said, and then I thought, going in, it must be difficult also right now with a new technology being proliferated in this aggressive way, right? To actually get sources and get companies what it actually do. When you ask companies, most companies will give you a nice story right now, won't they? they tell, oh, we're doing great with AI, because no one wants to say they're not doing it, right? Isn't that difficult for you?
It's difficult, but of course the one answer is to say, okay, how far are you in your project, right? And most of them are still in pilot. And then of course, if they say it's in production and really used, then you listen more carefully and find out what are they really doing, right? And I think most are using it now in pilots internally. Some people are trying to go out and use it customer facing, but then they have now learned, I think, that they need to combine it with some
hopefully
augmented generation of data, right? Or even rules, and that's what we are trying to push right now. Is can we use the language technology to automate this structuring of all the chaotic documentation that every company have, and in particular the law. So I read the other day that there's a growing acceptance that our laws are getting so complex now that even lawyers cannot really keep up, which is of course terrifying. And then I saw also some of our politicians in Denmark admitting that we are voting on laws that we haven't read, right?
Great stuff.
So I think there's a huge potential in using, on one hand, the large language models, and on the other hand, rule-based or knowledge graphs, and then use the language models to structure the guidelines, the laws, and have put them into a format that can be queried, can be cleaned up, and then used in a responsible way.
So maybe help our politicians and those operationalizing the laws afterwards to maybe get a better understanding what's in them, or maybe simplify them, or...
for instance, in Denmark, we have a local government Denmark, the umbrella organization for all the municipalities. They have a collection of more than 700 forms, which is old-fashioned kind of PDF forms for applications of any kind of benefits or permissions. And that's manually maintained. So whenever there's a change in the law, you have to go in and say, okay, there's a new field here, and people have to understand what is required to fill out and what's not, and that's a manual thing. You have to read the law on the back side of this form. And then the next step is that we have self-service solutions, because we are a highly digitalized society. So we, for instance, we have this industry-facing website, VIRK, where they have 1,500 self-service solutions, and they are programmed manually based on forms like this, right, and the law, and they also have to be maintained. And in the municipalities, and they're using systems from other vendors that have manually coded their interpretation of the law, right? And all these steps, translation gaps, are manual, and there are some choices made, maybe some mistakes made that will cause problems. And then we, as a user, we have to understand the law to actually fill out the right stuff, because we don't get a lot of guidance when we fill it out. So there's a huge potential of savings for companies, for citizens, for the society in general, if we had a more trustworthy. And then, of course, the fascinating thing is if we have this trustworthy knowledge representation behind, then we could add language technology that can understand what you say, or like Siri, right? So you can ask questions to this instead of typing in a form when you want to apply for a new benefit, or adding something to your house at home. Then you could essentially talk to your and get a trustworthy answer, because we can talk
to sort of a digital caseworker.
Yes,
in a way,
and it's trustworthy because it's not only a language model; it's actually building on a knowledge graph behind. So you can trace back and say, well, you got this answer because we understood you wanted this, and the law says this and that, right?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So we can get an explanation.
And that's also something here that we're not doing today. We don't have this, as you said, we don't have this overview on how the law is being interpreted and implemented. So there are things here that we can actually just do, because we have unlimited power or whatever we'd call the AI, right?
Yeah.
So we can do things that we couldn't do before.
Yeah.
And so it's not about replacing lawyers, because no lawyers are doing this today. They don't know it, right? No one has this this overview of the law. Great stuff. Yeah. I was recently, interviewed by a Danish online magazine, right? It's not out yet, but it's going to be soon, where I said that the current AI hype is the biggest hype the world has ever experienced. I'm an educated historian, so I always get a little bit, when I say things like that, and I saw it in printing afterwards, like, do I really mean that? I start thinking about all the things that could be more hype, tulips in Holland and 60. Yeah. But would you agree to this, that this is the biggest AI hype we've ever had? I think 100 million users in 1.5 months. Have we ever seen anything like this?
No, I don't think I have. But of course, I'm getting old and forgetting things, right? Because of course there have been revolutions and fantastic stuff, right? But the fact that it is still on the headlines, I mean, when you open the weekend newspaper, there's a new report on the potentials of this, right?
1.5 year after ChatGPT.
1.5 year after, yeah. That is kind of impressive, right? So I don't recall having seen anything more hyped. And that is also, I mean, that is what worries me, because the newspapers don't get to page 3 of this report. So the reports might actually be sane in some sense, because they state, okay, these are the kind of assumptions we make. And if you can overcome these assumptions, then you may get this huge value out of it, right? But the assumptions are never put in the headlines of the newspapers. Oh. So I think it is the biggest hype I have seen so far.
And it also seems to me sometimes to be a hype to end them all, right? Because it's such a broad concept. Everything's becoming AI now. So if you just call it the AI hype, I'd like to say degenerative AI hype all the time. But people are just, AI.
But I mean, that's another problem, right? Because now everyone thinks AI is generative AI. That's it, right?
And all the old algorithms are being called AI as well. So.
Yeah. And everything. But also, I mean, the word algorithm has been polluted, right? Because an AI model is not really an algorithm, right? An algorithm is giving you a precise and provable correct answer. Yeah. But that's exactly the opposite of what an AI model is doing, right? So we started polluting the word algorithm, and now we are polluting the word AI. But I think it has always been like that AI is the current top technology or approach, right?
So what we can't do with computers, what we can do is called software, right? Isn't that the way we go?
Yeah. But I would have liked to go back and actually have an educated distinction between, okay, what is an algorithm? Well, it's something that solves a well-defined problem in a well-defined way. What is an AI model? Well, it's the opposite. It's something that gives you an estimate of a solution that you may use, but you should be aware that it may be wrong.
I tried to define it the other day as AI working. That's what we can do with unstructured data or something like that. But it's really difficult to define, actually.
But I mean, you can also put structured rules into AI. I mean, the old expert systems, right? So a chess program in the old days was based on rules, right? And could play pretty well and even follow the rules, right? I mean, so if you ask ChatGPT to play chess...
Wasn't that an algorithm then?
I mean, well, no, it's not really an algorithm, because it's not solving a problem of winning, right? But it's following rules, right? But of course, you can also describe an algorithm as a collection of rules. But then I think what distinguishes here is that a general problem is a problem kind of with an infinite number of inputs that can be described in a finite way and have a finite solution that works for all the inputs. And that's not what we're doing with the AI models.
I love this, having an academic on the podcast, and we're talking about words, and that's perfect. Yeah. But I talking about hype, when I studied, I always tried to figure out what my professors were studying and writing about when they were not teaching me, because then you get to the cutting edge of science, right? Yeah. And I'm just really curious, and you already alluded to this, but I'm just curious about what has changed in your work since October 2022 and now. What have your focus completely changed? Are you still working on the same research projects, or?
I'm still working on this grand challenge of having digital computational law. I mean, that is explainable and can be maintained by domain experts. So that is kind of my big challenge I have been pursuing, and that has changed, of course, because of the language model. So you cannot go and get funding or say you work on this without addressing what can we do with the large language models, right? So my new project I'm hoping to start will be how can we combine these two technologies in a responsible way, so to get a hybrid AI solution. And I did see at the Stanford Law School the other day that they also kind of recognize, yes, we need to overcome the hallucinations and the non-trustworthiness of the language models, so we need to go back and combine these approaches, the expert systems and the more symbolic networks. So that is what I'm working, and that has changed, and even this company we started based on my research, they have also already made an interface where you can use ChatGPT to build your knowledge graphs. And the next thing is, of course, to be able to have a natural conversation with your online form. So you're not filling in data in a old-fashioned way.
No, but I think that one, the last one is super. I see, a lot of frontline workers also. I've spoken to facility management companies where, you could have people who have foreigners and don't dyslexic people.
Yeah.
They can now fill out a work order correctly, all those things, right? Because they can talk to, a Whisper or API or whatever, and then it will talk with the LLM model and understand what you're trying to do and what you've done, and then fill out the form for you or fill out the work order.
Yeah, and we may keep the form to have a human-in-the-loop interface that we are familiar with, right? So we can see...
Also to get some structured data on the other end, so you can actually quantize your...
But of course, at some point, you may not need to show the form to people, because you can just save the structured data behind, and then you can give them a confirmation in another way, maybe tell them the consequences of what they have been typing in, and because that's something we sometimes miss in our computer user interfaces, that we cannot look ahead.
No.
So we don't know what is the consequence of pressing this button right now, right? Because the computer... Yeah,
just like the Robocop, right? With the big robot. He'd probably like to know what was the consequence if he answered wrong, right? The one who got shot. Remember that one?
And I mean, that's exactly... And well, this morning it's a more safe situation, but I was withdrawing money from an ATM, and it didn't tell me that I had to ask for... use some other button in the beginning to get it in euro. So I just withdraw cash, and I thought I could type in the amount and then choose if I wanted it in Danish kroner or euro. But no, when I typed in the amount, I got it in Danish kroner.
And you needed it in euros because...
I needed it in euros because my daughter was going to Germany. So I needed to go back, and then now I have a lot of Danish kroner. And I never have cash, right?
No, right.
So yeah, that's annoying.
That's great. So now you can tip people, finally. When we first met a couple of months back, Thomas, I remember you mentioning that some people almost looked at you as a machine antagonist today, a machine stormer, as we say in Danish, people who stormed the looms back in the industrialization period, right?
Yeah.
Because you advocated a regulated, cautious approach to AI adoption, and because you didn't necessarily think everything is an AI case. I remember you said that as well, right?
Yeah.
Let's dive into these accusations a bit, their positions and how you're advising public authorities and lawmakers in the current tech climate.
Yeah. I mean, so that's the thing, right? So that's also something I have during the last year. A lot of people ask for talks or presentations on AI, and of course they have the expectations from the media and the public, the government, that this is a good thing that we should just go and use. It's ready to use. And then I come and give my talk where I say, well, AI is many things. It's not only generative AI, and it has opportunities, but it also have a lot of pitfalls, and it's not mature. Then people raise their eyebrows, And some...
But Gartner said.
Yeah, exactly, right? Or McKinsey, or Boston Consulting Group, or Kraker, Deloitte. I mean, so we have all these reports, Goldman Sachs. But the thing is, in the end, I feel that most people actually come and thank me and say, well, thank you for actually giving us a more nuanced view of this. And that's, of course, a danger. If I get too obsessed by talking the hype down, people will stop listening.
Yeah.
So you also have to...
I realize that myself as well.
Yeah, you have to admit that this is a fascinating technology, and it has potentials, but it also has this deceiving power. So we really, really need good ways of getting this validation.
I think my boss told me, you were very negative about the productivity tool hype. You just do this, use a chat somewhere, and then you'll get more productive and you'll become a better person tomorrow or something, right? But if you haven't become a better person tomorrow, it's on you because you didn't use it right. It's always this non-falsifiable statements, right? So I think my boss said you're very critical. So oh yeah. And I live from, being an AI lead. This is what I do, right? Yeah. So I thought about that and said, but I actually really, really believe in the technology. I believe there's tons of benefits from it. There's tons of things we can do. But I don't love hype.
No.
I love the tech. I don't love the hype. Yeah. I love what we can do. And I think, if people look at it, we can do some things, maybe get 15% increase in productivity, if you implement it the right ways very quickly. Yeah. But people want, 80% because they've been promised unlimited potential, right, in these reports, right?
And that's the interesting. So the recent report that came from Kraker and Deloitte in Denmark, it actually has a nuanced story to tell, because it says that we interviewed 18 expats and they were actually disagreeing. So they were giving numbers between 10, 20 and 80%, right? But that's not the headline. I mean, that could have been a really interesting headline in newspapers. Experts disagree about the potential, but no, they took the average, and then it was still a potential on above 40%, right? But another interesting thing is that they actually used ChatGPT as part of so they took their own grok, so they have used, and that's also written in the method description, which I find a bit scary, because this is exactly an example where they say, okay, we had these 1,800, and maybe even 18,000, I think it was, 18,000 different function descriptions that a job can be composed of. And it was too much for us to calculate all this, so we used ChatGPT. And then, you should not use ChatGPT for doing anything about calculation or analysis, right?
If you ask it for the last 10 digits of pi, it will give you the last 10 digits of pi. I did that also myself.
But of course, we should be aware of the limitations of our technology. So I did this experiment with my daughter, that if you ask it to multiply 11 and then the same number with 7 ones, right? So that's 1,111,111. If you ask it to multiply these two numbers, it will get it right. But if you say, instead of 11, say 111, then it's able to explain the steps, write out how do if I should multiply this in a manual way, this is how I will do it, and that is actually right. It puts out the right steps, because maybe it has been asked before. But then when it then give you the result, it's wrong. Because it cannot actually do summation, right?
No, but they build that in with functions now, right? In ChatGPT.
Yeah, and that's the trick. So you should know that if you have, but this is I tried this with of course the free version 3.5. You get rubbish.
Yeah.
If you ask ChatGPT 4 and tell it not to use Python or function,
then you get. Okay.
Then it will write out the right way of doing it, but give the wrong answer.
Yeah. But even with Python, it actually gives the last 10 digits of pi, because Python will give it only a certain amount of digits.
Yeah. So the pitfalls.
So,
I mean, the lack of understanding you can still. But this is very basic math, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that people sometimes forget that also other tools make mistakes, but in a more predictable way. So, for instance, Excel, it can only calculate 16 digits correctly.
Okay.
And it doesn't tell you. No. So if you try to...
Doesn't say when you open it.
Well, no, exactly. There's no footnote saying be aware of only 16 digits precision. And even worse, if you put in two numbers in two cells and do the multiplication, it will just fill in zeros in the end, in the last digits.
Okay.
And you may not notice if it's a single zero coming in, right? That might be right. You don't do the math. And that you can then compare, of course, if you do by hand, or if you remember how to do that, or if you use a Python program, they can usually actually calculate with bigger numbers, right? And that's because people don't realize, well, Excel is using a limited representation of integers behind the scenes. They have maybe never learned about that, right? And that was kind of basic stuff when I started in computer science in 91, that, okay, computers have finite representation, unless you use a very advanced math program where they represent numbers in a different way. Yeah. They just represent it as a finite binary number, and it has a limitation.
But it's funny with also, using it for research, because I think that what I always said, ChatGPT wants to please you.
Yeah.
And people are like, why does it want to please me? Because it is only, and I'm trying to come on, guys. It's trying to predict what would be the best word to follow what you asked it.
Yeah.
What would be most appropriate. Yeah. That inherently is a pleasing mechanism.
Yeah. And it's a mirror of you, right?
Of your prompt, exactly. People don't really understand that, because either it's a system and then it's completely dumb, or it's a person and then it's not dumb. But the middle ground here is really difficult to grasp. Yeah. And I get that.
But I mean, you also asked me. So of course, what is different in my work? I mean, the difference in research is that now I'm looking more into how to combine these technologies, because there are some fascinating potential. Mm-hmm. There's a huge difference also in my teaching, because I need now to actually be aware that the students have these tools, and also tell them upfront that it's okay that you use them, but you should be aware of the pitfalls, right? And for instance, in business process modeling, that is one of my other research fields, it's getting better and better. I mean, now you can upload a PDF picture of a business process diagram, and then you can ask it basic questions. And behind the scenes, this PDF has been transcribed to some text, and then it can actually answer questions to a limited extent, right? It doesn't know all the constraints and how you actually are allowed to model business processes. So if you ask it to make a change, it come up with something that sounds reasonable, but often is actually not legal. So if you would take that diagram and put it into a machine, the machine would say, "Oh, no."
But that's the point, right? I said, so another day I said, I wouldn't want someone who's unskilled to come and fix my electricity with a chatbot. No. But I might actually say that in the future, I'd probably want the electrician who has a chatbot to verify what he's doing. So have someone who knows BPMN, right, with the chatbot, who knows. Yeah. And I know that's the old one with, you're not getting replaced by AI, you're getting replaced by a person using AI. Yeah. But there is some truth to this, actually, I think. Yeah. Because you need expertise to know how to ask it the right questions. And you also need expertise to evaluate what you get in the other end. Yeah. There's no replacing competency. No. And another thing, a lot of people really need to realize that.
But and that's the challenge we're facing right now in education, because we have
also in hype markets, right?
We have to change how we structure the learning process, because if the students just replace these essential learning steps by using a robot, that they are not yet trained to discover when it makes mistakes, then it will be a disaster.
But that's what I said. I also said, if this fixes all the junior consultants of the world, who will ever become a senior consultant? Yeah. It's the same principle, right?
Yeah, it's the same principle. And that is, there's a risk there that we are getting poor educated computer programmers, the coming years. Because they
downward push on code quality in GitHub, I read all that, and also that it's too easy for someone starting in a new field to feel like they're good at it, because they may be good at prompting, but they don't know if it's a good result, but they can sound more proficient very quickly, but they don't really know. And then, but to get to the high level, you really need to be able to have a lot of domain knowledge so you can ask the right questions, right?
And before, of course, we could look up in Stack Overflow and all other sources, but there we also had this validated by some.
Yeah, we knew there was
humans.
someone who, some expert,
and we could go in a discussion with people, but now that has also been kind of, because now we don't know if it's a human or someone using a robot. Like playing a chess computer today. I mean, you don't really know if you're playing a human or a human who is just copying.
No, but I saw Azure Copilot for Azure, right? And I was like, oh, that's impressive. And then I talked to one of my colleagues here at Basic about it, and he said, yeah, but you still need to know how to work with Azure.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to work with Azure, you can't ask it the right questions, and you don't know if you get the right response. Oh. And if you know how to work with Azure, why would you use Copilot? You just go click the button because the interface is already as lean as it can be. So it's like, oh yeah. And that just made me think, okay, there's something here just not, that doesn't, there's some kind of circle, you know, a snake is biting its own tail or something, right?
Yeah. And then I also think that people saying that, well, but these technologies are really great at producing our letters and text and all this. Maybe we should look at instead how to reduce the amount of letters and text we produce, right?
Don't have it summarize your meetings. Have fewer meetings.
Yeah,
you know?
And a creepy example I got I was at a panel debate yesterday on the municipality deassociation meeting. Was that they in Norway made a clinical test of a chatbot that children could talk to, and then the chatbot came up with warnings if this child may have some diagnosis, right?
Okay.
That's pretty creepy. And then the guy telling about it, that he admitted, well, but I would probably not like my own kids to talk to this, right? No, that's a good warning sign, right? That maybe you should not go this. And they, of course, it's phrased as an ethical problem that, well, we have these 1 year or half a year waiting to get to a psychologist. So, I mean, we need to help these kids, right? But maybe we should actually use the AI to find out why do we have this half-year waiting time to get to a psychologist. I mean, are there some processes here that could be optimized? Yeah. And why are we getting so many kids in the first time? That's probably the good problem to solve instead of trying to replace a psychologist with a robot.
Maybe you know, maybe it's because they have too little. Touch points with a real person in the first place, and then removing. That's just maybe. You don't know, right? No. But you could.
But that is part of the research I've been doing with colleagues at KU. I mean, trying to involve all stakeholders already in the idea phase, so you figure out, is this the right problem we're really solving?
So it's sort of like a decision intelligence issue to some extent.
I mean, it's
mapping out the whole flow of information,
but also finding out when people come. Well, is this a technology looking for a problem, or is it really the right problem? Do we attack it at the right point? I mean, we also saw it in Denmark that municipalities try to predict if children were mistreated at home, because the reason was that there are an increase in applications notifications saying, well, we suspect something here. But maybe you should really try to use the AI to analyze why do we have this increase instead of trying to use AI to prioritize these many notifications, right?
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Great stuff here, really great stuff. And now, you know, getting back to the regulation stuff, the EU AI Act, China and the US and all that, right? I saw a meme that spread everywhere recently that said that the US innovates, China imitates, and the EU regulates. But to be fair, right, China regulated AI first, didn't they? And the EU AI Act, is that just a novel departure from the data protection regulation already in place? Or how do you see this meme, right?
Yeah, of course, that's also a biased meme, right? I have had research projects also with researchers in China. And I mean, some of them imitate, others really do deep stuff, right? And then, of course, regulation is a very powerful tool for governments. So, of course, there has been regulation in China even long before we came up with. But it's a different kind of regulation, right? Or maybe the intention of the regulation is different. So whether you want to control the humans or the citizens or control the technology companies. I think it's right that the AI Act is a kind of continuation of the GDPR regulation. It has some new flavor, of course, that introducing this risk-based graduation, and then trying to define a regulation for a technological approach, which is challenging, right? And they have had a lot of challenges in how to actually define AI, because we know there's no unique definition.
No, I think they say algorithms, or they called it, I don't know what they called it actually.
Yeah, and OECD came up with a new one, which was even more fluffy. I mean, in the beginning, they tried to define it as the way you implement it. So they will say, well, we have these general approaches of rule-based, machine learning-based, and statistical. But then some people got nervous. What does that mean to our financial prediction that we have in place many places? And then this kind of got toned down. And then we have generative AI that was not completely fitting into any of these boxes. So they also had to. So that is the problem of defining something based on how you build it, because we always innovate new ways of building.
But we need to define the laws, right? And in order to control things or build things, we need laws that actually function, that touch upon the right things.
That's true. But of course, the thing is, you should not be too narrow in how you define the law based on current technology, right? So you should kind of be technology.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's also why we talk about a vehicle or something that drives on the roads, but not exactly define how you build that car.
No, that's
right.
That's
right. But you
open for interpretation.
But you characterize some features of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the speed it can.
Yeah.
So that's important, right? If it's below some speed, it's no longer really a car, right?
So it's actually more the signifié than the signifiant. If you go almost Saussure, right. That's actually quite funny. Yeah, but I think and then the US innovates, right? But does the US really do that, or do they just let the big tech firms just run wild, right? There is something, right now, big tech versus privacy. We have that all over. We have big tech versus copyright now as well with the Gen AI.
Yeah.
Big tech almost versus free will. If we take social media and other things as well, is the modern democratic individual and state slowly get into a war with big technology, big tech. I think I know that's a can of worms, right? Yeah. But I just thought of that and thought, are we actually seeing some contours here, something where they are attacking some liberal rights and values?
They are. I attended a meeting in Montreal in February where a lot of good people from, of course, we were in our own bubble, right? So there were lawyers, there were human rights organizations, and computer scientists, and data scientists and AI scientists. It was in the MILA, the Montreal Institute for AI. And the purpose of that was to say, how can we define the human rights impact of AI? And there was a lot of concern in that room that the direction we're going around now with the very few big tech players is actually threatening our human rights, our freedom of controlling what we want to do with our life, the access to information, and that was, they were looking to EU and say, yeah, thank God they're actually trying to come up with some regulation that can give some pushback, because the power is being centralized on a very few people. And that is kind of part of the problem here, that we have this situation in the US, and of course also other places in the world, where the companies have more freedom to shoot first and then ask afterwards, right? And that is, of course, that puts speed to some kind of innovation, right? Because you can try out a lot of stuff, and you can get people hooked on it, and then you have a lot of users, and then you can earn money, and then you can go on to the next big thing. But of course, there's this risk that you get too fast. So we get social media that have a downside of...
I think Stephen Pemberton in the second episode of this podcast said that we need the old generation to die before we know how to use the web the right way, he said. And they didn't mean to get killed, but just to die, which was a very fun quote. But I think some of the things I've been thinking a lot about the last couple of years is that if we look at the monopolies we had, I think wasn't it some monopolies that were broken up 100 years ago in the US and stuff like that because they were too big. I think if we look at infrastructure, right, critical infrastructure in modern societies, if you start a business tomorrow, you would not exist if you don't pay Google ransom money to be on, a Google search page or something. If you don't do SEO, if you don't do these things.
Yeah.
So we have a private company who owns the main street of the world, right?
Yeah.
That's critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the politicians we're currently having understand what critical infrastructure means in a digital world.
No. And they seem to have been given up, right? So accepted also that if you want to have an operating system, it's okay to require that this is Microsoft, even though that there are alternatives, right? And yes, the critical infrastructure of not access to the internet, but knowing where to find stuff on the internet, right?
Your shop would still exist, right? But it would just be boarded over, so no one could see your sign, right? Who you were.
Yeah.
So
and no one will pass by.
No, exactly, right?
Yeah. And the funny thing is that, I mean, some of these programs, Facebook and stuff, I mean, it's not rocket science. So having...
It's just because they're big.
It's just because they're big and they had access to venture funding, essentially. Right? So that's one of the key problems I see in Europe, that we don't have this more easy funding and very rich companies that can spawn off new companies. It's much more difficult to do in Europe.
Yeah, but I also think we just need to figure out a way to control or break up these big companies a little bit, so we get more. I think actually this critical infrastructure, if you look at it in a very very polemic way, this is a mobster methods, right? If you don't pay me, you don't have a shop. Right? Pay me money now, you don't. It sounds almost that way, right? You protection money, but that's usually only something a state can actually claim protection money, right? And suddenly we have private companies big enough to sort of say we own it.
Yeah,
we own Google.
And we do see. I mean, we do have court cases also in the US, right? And we do have pushback from the European Union. So that is what is being tried, and one can hope. But of course, what you also realize when you join the standardization work is that these big companies are, of course, also present.
Of course, they are.
Standardizations are made mainly by companies.
Yeah.
And even though it's a European standard you're writing, they have proxies, right? So you have companies representing the big companies.
Yeah, also those are best positioned to make it a standard if you want to implement it.
Yeah.
So it's
and they need to be in there, but you just need to have other people also spending these long hours of. But
it comes back to my mobster metaphor, right? You need to have the mafia involved, right? Or you won't get anything done in this city, right? Yeah. But there's something there, right? It's on the edge. I know.
I mean, now you say mobster. I mean, I'm watching a Netflix series or it's HBO, I don't know, but called Tokyo Vice, which is on these. Yakutsis in Tokyo fighting each other. Of course, the dilemma of the police here is whether they should control the balance so you don't get a war, or you should make them kill each other, right? That could be a strategy also.
Great. I just want to also, we've been around all some of the issues here, but how will humanity benefit from the advent of these big foundational models and advanced AI? And how do we ensure we get these benefits, Thomas? I'd love to have your, few words on that.
I think we can benefit if we step back and say, well, it's not mature enough to be an easy solution to all our problems, but we can use the more non-sexy old stuff, 5-year-old AI. To have some more reliable and trustworthy answers, and then we can use the language models to get new interfaces, because it is really about being able to have a more conversational natural language interface to our systems. We just need to remember that it is only a language model, so it cannot reason, it cannot solve the problems. It needs to be combined with a reasoning engine behind, and we need to do the boring work of actually identifying the rules, and because otherwise we cannot point to the rules afterwards. So I think if we try to ignore the easy solution, as one of my colleagues in NLP said the other day, well, these language models has moved the burden from setting up a system to actually controlling it. So we can very easily now set up a system, but we need to put a lot of effort into controlling it.
I've said that as well. I said that, we the symbolic AIs were all about, figuring out how we build all these nests of rules, right, and symbols into it. And that was a very big work to build big networks of this. But now we sort of make the neural network like a shortcut. But now we need to spend unlimited amount of symbolic almost controlling it. Yeah, exactly. So we just flipped it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so. If we admit that we have to go back and actually spend the time, and there we can benefit from the language models as well, right? To build up these structured knowledge bases and maintain them.
But we need to know what we want to do with them and what we don't want them to do.
And then we need to answer the question: is this the right problem and the right solution?
Yeah, great stuff. Thomas, this has been a great conversation, and I really love so many of these brilliant insights you've shared today. And I only have one question left, which is sort of the centerpiece of the podcast. So I hope you're ready for that one.
Yeah.
So Thomas, what is the only constant?
I had many answers to that, and we have touched upon it actually during this talk, of course. But so I decided that the only constant is bias. It's something that will always be there in the world, in humans in particular. So if everyone kind of tries to sell you a system without bias, you should be cautious and say, that cannot be true, or it's a very boring system because it cannot distinguish between anything. So that's really, if we are aware of that and don't try to fool ourselves and say this is a bias-free system, or we can build one, and don't fool ourselves to also forget our own bias. As you actually said, automation bias is one of the big dangers here when you get a very likable, convincing technology that can speak to you in your own language. Then you should remember, I might be tricked to believe something here which is not true. And of course, it also goes with our confirmation bias of what can technology do. I was brought up with computers, right? So I also have to kind of hold myself back and say, well, it's not true, Thomas. There's a downside here also. You have to be careful. If we admit, I also really like the point made by Dijkstra when he got the Turing Award in 1972, which was the year I was born, that we have always thought that we could do more with computers than that we're really ready to do. So if we could tailor this kind of technology fascination, which is a bias in many of us, and take a step back and say, well, we are not going to build this Tower of Babel or something unfeasible. We will build a less sexy thing, but it works. Then I think we will have a much better future with AI.
That's a really great answer, Thomas. Thank you so much for that answer, and thank you for being on The Only Constant. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you too.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.